All right, well, see how all this goes. This is my first time presenting anything. So, first off, a little bit about myself. I'm an IT pro. I'm working with Pinnacle Data Services. We're the IT subsidiary of the Pinnacle Bank Group. I've been in IT for over 20 years, and there's my Twitter handle if you're willing to watch or listen to me ramble, I guess. What we're going to cover is the problem I was trying to solve kind of set me down this path, and I thought it might be something other people would run into. So that what the new Windows Image Tools module, what it can do, and how it works. So, if you ever try to spin up a quick lab, you want to test something, unless you got machines that just sitting around doing nothing, you usually start with a fresh image so that you don't have any unknowns on the machine. And it takes quite a time to update, especially if you got to work with an older OS like 2008. So I wanted to be able to keep them up to date. While MDT can do that, it's not something I use in my work environment, and sure as heck I'm going to take the time to set it up at home. But also, in a home lab, you don't have a lot of space. If you're trying to work with a high-density production environment, you also need to have fairly small images. So one of the things I wanted to do was make sure I use core, or just make sure anything I didn't need was removed from the OS. That, not everything runs on NAND, so I picked it in its amazingly small footprint all the time. All right, but one of the things I ran into, especially on my first foray into desired state configuration, was the fact that once you added a hotfix, there was a fairly good chance you were not going to be able to add any features under the system. So there was a hotfix that was required originally with 2012 R2, and if you had that installed, you could no longer add like the GUI or the management tools onto a core system. And that really became a headache for me. So after a lot of research, I found out you needed to be pulling from a source. Now, why that didn't work in my particular environment is the fact that Windows, the system accounts could not reach the internet in our environment. So if you don't have internet access, there was no way to pull from Windows Update on that. So I needed a image file that was more up to date than the one on the ISO. So you couldn't just point it at the source folder on the ISO and add, say, .NET 3.5 in our environment. So I ended up coming up with a couple of tools. First, I needed to be able to convert the WIM into a VHD. Now, Microsoft has their own big script for it called Convert Windows Image, and it's worked really well for me initially, but I tried to package some of its functionality into a module, and the whole thing exploded. It doesn't work when that function is used in a module. Had a couple of bugs in it, so I decided to copy the useful code out of it and start with my own. So some of the things it does is the initialize VHD partition is to put the partition table. If I'm going to be using a UEFI or BIOS layout, so you have to know that avoids having to worry about what those are set up. The set one, it pretty much populates the images in there. If you set one up with the recovery partition, recovery tools, things that you don't really need in the VM, but you have, if you're doing it, it's a bare metal. I mean, that handles all of that. And the convert to WIM to VHD is the function that kind of wraps around those two. Of course, also, if I want to automate anything with a image, I needed an Untitled XML. And all right, the capital P. All right, so the new Untitled XML was just to build the basic unattend that is going to silently install Windows. It can automatically put copy extra files in, it's going to start up a script for me to be able to run the Windows update. So I had to have it be able to create a scheduled task. And that one turned out to be quite the challenge because task schedule service isn't running during the specialized phase. And if you're not familiar with how Windows does its initial setup, it runs a specialized phase where it adds all the drivers into for what it detects, and then it reboots again and then goes to the out-of-box experience. And that's where it's going to ask you for the language and the admin password and stuff. And I just wanted to get rid of all of that. So I got it so that initially, when I first started this project, I was logging in, doing the auto login. Well, that puts your local administrator account in plain text. You know, didn't really want that. Not that it's a big deal if it's not going to stay there, but I found it easier now. I don't ever have to log in, and I can run through the whole process. Then I had a couple of, these were originally private functions, and then I realized they were just too useful, so I thought I'd expose them. This one, mount the VHD and run a block. Basically, it's going to set a variable for the drive letter, and then run whatever script block you apply to it. So it's very useful for detecting whether a file has changed, what might be present, adding files in. Working with that. Now, the other two I needed was a way of determining, before I built a VM to attach to, did I need a version 1 or a version 2? Because if you mismatch the partition, she's not going to boot. So I had a simple function to just grab the VHD and come back. Is it an MBR or is it a GPT partition? And then the invoke create VM run and wait was just a simple thing to start the VM, let it run its scheduled task, which would run the Windows update, and then it shuts down. So this just waits for it to finish, and it creates a randomly named VM and would attach to whatever switch in the Hyper-V that I had available. So the main thing here is to get, this is kind of the meat and potatoes of the whole project, was to set it up so we get, I had to have some information stored. I would try to avoid having too much stuff in the config file, but the very basics is you need to have a switch to attach to, and if you have to use static IPs, that's got to be there too. So I had put in 2 functions to handle that, to update the config. It's just a CLI XML, so it's a hash table exported as XML, and 2 functions to handle managing that. Then the add the update image takes your ISO or WIM file, injects the unattended XML, and places it in a specific folder with a naming format that allows the invoke Windows Update to be able to update everything you have in that folder and just run the Windows Update and export it. All right, and the other thing, because I like to work with DSC, I needed at least WMF 4 or 5. So I built this little function to download. It downloads .NET 4.6 and the WMF, and then inserts those into the VHD, boots the thing up. The on-boot scheduled task will then handle installing it. And then just because I ran into so many people that have made some great utilities out there, they do a presentation on it, but they don't set up the folder structure or show you how to. You're not able to actually use it in your own environment to test with. So I created a function that also handles that. It's going to create the folder structure and a couple of example files. So enough of the slides. We'll take a look at some of the stuff. First, I'm going to set up my environment here. Okay. So the new example one here is going to create the folder structure and the example files to show you what that looks like. Here we go. So I've got the config XML and a couple of different examples of how it can be used. Have those over here. So here's what the config XML. I hate XML. Working with this is just quite the frustration. So I would never, that's why I built the functions to directly deal with the config data. I know a lot of people like JSON and stuff. I'm not that familiar with that particular one, but I wanted to make it as fairly easy. So so an example of what the config looks like. Basically, the IP type, DHCP, IPv4, IPv6. Then whether there's a VLAN associated with your switch, basic networking information you need to get going, and which switch the VM is going to attach to when it actually starts the update process. Okay. So to kind of set it, I've got just a couple of basic switches, IPv4. You just send all the basic information in, and so I've changed it so I can easily script it in an environment to auto set up. So if I've got what I want to have and I just have a machine I want to set it up on, I've controlled a few settings and have it ready to roll. So one of the other things I had is, if you're going to be working with an example, you're also going to need ISOs. So the eval ISOs, of course, are only good for a short period of time. So you have to re-download or reset up a machine off of them on a regular basis. So I also created a script here for downloading those fairly quick. This is part of the examples here. It's just going to go to Microsoft and grab the latest versions of these files. So if they don't exist, it's going to download the new set. So if I were to pull one of these out and then run this download script, it's going to fire up a bits transfer in the back. It's not in the background, it's an interactive one, so you can just watch the thing download. It takes forever, so I'm not going to sit here and watch bits move tonight. So the basic example script is actually a little more complex looking than you would think for a basic, but here I'm going to set all of the settings I need for my configuration, get an admin credential for the unattended that gets used, and then it just steps through each of the ISOs that are in there that are auto download. Now the Windows 7 one does not. It's going to create an image for each, each index inside the ISO for each version. It's just a quick way to get the basics of a fully patched image. But normally we want to do something a little more than that. To say, if I'm actually wanting to add like .NET 3.5, if you ever had a situation where you build up past the machine and then the vendor hands you the list of additional software to install, and they want .NET 3.5, that seems to be very popular. And that's usually one of the ones that just totally fail if you don't have internet connection. So in the case of Windows 7, the update script doesn't work very well with WMF 4 or 2. So I've got it, this one is set up to update them to WMF 4. And once all the images have been added, it's going to go ahead and just invoke the Windows update against that folder. So it will go in to everything in the base images. Okay. It goes into the base images, and it would just update every single one of these. So what it does is it's got the unattended XML is sticking in a single task to set up the task scheduler to do an on boot. So that first specialized phase, it runs through that and then reboots. And after that, it runs PowerShell command and updates everything. So what the add update image is primarily doing is going to get, first I'm going to feed it the path to the folder structure. Now we need a friendly name, that's the base name of each of the images. Of course we need an administrator password. There would be situations where a product key is necessary. I have not ran into very many of those. You set the size, whether it's a dynamic, whether or not it needs to be BIOS or UEFI. The Windows to Gold is kind of a weird one because it puts the UEFI files on a BIOS image. That's really intended for sticking it on USB. But I'm passing through multiple functions for the convert WIM to VHD. So we have a path, make sure we have the ISO or WIM we're pulling from, an index number for the WIM that's on there. And this one here, add a payload for remove features. That goes through all of the Windows features that are marked for removed, and that's going to be your .NET 3 file, so that those would automatically load. It's on a GUI install. It's .NET 3.5 and PowerShell 2.0, which is automatically loaded when you load 3.5. I can also inject drivers, packages. I believe those are mainly cab files. It's using the DISM command. And then files to inject, that's pretty much, you pointed at a folder structure, it's going to copy that straight to the C drive so that you can pre-populate anything that you might need. Forced to automatically override there. Now, one of the things I'm doing here is so the first boot script. Now I see a lot of people when they want to create a file, they stick everything in a string. Well, I found it's a little easier to edit if you keep it as a script block. And so when I actually edit, I'm just doing a new item and passing that script block as the value, and it just creates me a text file of that. So to start the scheduler service, that one actually I was ready to pull my hair out trying to figure out why nothing I did would schedule a task. Now the reason I'm using the command prompt task scheduler to set up the task is for some reason the PowerShell, when it's not available in Windows 7, those functions aren't there. And I wanted to be able to support that so I could test out scenarios that we use at work, because we're still using 7.4. And half the time it didn't work on 2012, and I don't know why. So I stuck with this one because it works. It's just a simple script to run. In this case, I'm going to tell it the PowerShell command. Now, the unattended XML can take any number of things. This particular one, I'm sending it a full. I'm copying in a full script. So when I create, now while as I said earlier, I originally set this up to auto log in. So I have this additional code here to reboot, which of course Windows 7 again does not have a force on restart computer. So I had to do some basic detection to see whether or not the force was an option on restart computer. And then switch that. Now, these really aren't needed when doing it as a specialized step, because it's going to automatically reboot once all the scripts are done. And then I just inject, I use the add, instead of doing it at the time I created the file, I'm adding this afterwards with the add script, with the run VH, the mount VHD and run block. So I'm taking this simple set of, the simple script block, and I am running creating the folder and then putting in this first boot file. And that's just creating the base image. Now, I don't have anything in there to do the update yet or anything. That actually handles when I tell it I want to update. Look at a little bit of what that looks like. So in this case, I'm going to be grabbing the Windows Server 2012 core. I want a UEF file layout, and I'm going to grab the ISO up here, and it's going to ask me for credentials. We'll grab an index 3, so that would be the data center core version. Okay. Doesn't matter because of the local administrator password. The user doesn't matter. I don't need to know what the username is. It's already a known issue. So. And oh, it already exists. And then we run through things early.
Creating your very first file that you used.
Yes.
Pointer that you didn't have a disk or period yet.
Yes. Yes. This is going to.
When it turns on, when it starts up, start first script that you did.
Yeah, it will create. Yeah, it had the unattended XML tells Windows to run this particular script, and all it's doing is scheduling a task. So every time that machine boots up again, it is looking for this app startup, and then I can hook in by just keep replacing that file. I can do a number of different things with boot time. So I can.
So you're getting your updates in.
Yeah, every time the machine boots up, it's going to run another script that the invoke Windows update is going to trigger, so that I also use the same hook for updating the WML.
I think it's one way to do that on the first build of the server without physically going in.
Oh yeah, the whole reason for the unattend. Now I've got some stuff to demo some of the features it does, but it's not a full. I can do everything unattend can do. It's just way too much, and I really don't like working with XML that much. Well, PowerShell has some great XML functions, but the problem with the unattend is you have to deal with namespace all the time. Otherwise, it breaks the file, and then the whole thing just fails and won't install or fails to do anything. It just keeps an internal reboot. So it's been a long time testing it. All right, so what this has done here, and I'm kind of big on verbosity, so everything ends up with a lot of stuff in here. So I'm going to add the script in there. Just love how he does. It always jumps down as soon as you click. All right, so it's creating the new unattend here. It's going to enabling the administrator for the first boot is one of the things I do by default when I'm adding things. Now, with an unattend XML, it's possible to come up with an OS that's completely unusable. If you didn't set the local administrator password, like on a client OS, and you didn't enable, you set it and didn't enable it, and didn't create another user, then it comes up with a password, but it's disabled, and there's no way to log into the box. That's Windows 10, Windows 7. That's kind of a pain in the neck. So I've got it Also, it's an additional script that runs at the boot time that enables the administrator account. And that's only with the add one. I mean, you can, once you've got the final thing, that new unattended XML is actually fairly useful for, it's got a lot more than what I'm using right here. Because all I want to do is just get the basics so I can do the Windows update. So it's also, yeah, the convert to WIM is going to kind of give me an idea. It's basically throwing back what settings it's been told right back at me so I can take a look at it. The 40 gig, UEFI. Unattend. Now I didn't pass, if you don't pass the unattend, the new unattended XML, a file path to put it in, it's just going to throw it into the temp folder. So that's what I did here. I just captured, because it outputs the directory object of the resulting file. And that's just what I provided into the convert function. It mounts the disk image, it creates the EFI system disk, it creates the Microsoft Reserve partition, and then it creates the Windows partition, formats it, and lays out the content of the WIM, which yeah, it's mounted those. That's basically what it's doing right now. Is DISM is doing its work in the background to extract all the files from the WIM and copy them over to what was mounted here as the key drive. Now, one of the things, if you've got autoplay turned on, when these functions run, they just keep opening windows every time they attach a new drive. And you know, if you're running a full screen application, sometimes they crash. So I've got that turned off because I got tired of the pop-ups. All right, well that's running here. So, okay, I've also got an advanced, this is actually a shorter script, but I'm doing a bit more with it, okay? I'm getting my admin credential here in advance, got the basic settings I need in order to make this run, providing it with the ISO path, and then set the config. I'm adding two images here. I want my source and my core version. So just basic Windows core and a source. So for the source one, I have told it to apply the payload to the removed item. Now that is actually a somewhat painful process, because when it does that, I have to guess at where those sources are. So normally when you're adding, like .NET 3.5 would be on the C drive under sources XSF is the location for .NET 3.5. But let's say I was using a core installation. Let's say I'm afterwards and I'm trying to pull from a WIM, after I've got one fully updated, and I want to add a few of the features on before I actually put it in production. I don't always know where those things are. So it takes the source WIM and it takes every single index and mounts all of them, and then uses them, runs through each one at source till it finds the feature to be able to add it. So that can actually turn into a kind of a slow process. And for the core one, I'm not doing anything particularly fancy. I'm just grabbing index 3. I deal with a lot of data center, so that's why I'm using the data center indexes. And there it goes, adding the boot code to make that VHD bootable. In this case, I'm using the update Windows image WMF. Now, I could do a WMF4. So that base image has been created. Here's the one we just built. Fairly small, straight off the ISO. It's only 5 gigs. This is the one above it. This one's been patched. It gets quite a bit bigger. So we have the dash WMF5 production preview. This one. Don't have the module imported. There we go. So I got WMF4, WMF5, production preview. If I don't specify, it's actually going to go try and find WMF5, which worked for about a few days back in December, and then didn't work anymore because they took it down. So all it was downloading was the sorry it's not here text file. So I want to add WMF5 here because, you know, that's kind of what I'm playing with a lot lately. So in this case, my advancement, I'm throwing that in there. Now, instead of just doing an invoke Windows Update against the entire folder and grabbing everyone, I'm going to use the image name, and that's the friendly name I specified earlier. And on this case, with the core, I'm telling it to reduce the size of image. Now, that is where I go into the side-by-side folder. That's the WinSSX. You know, I think that's in the System 32. And I remove everything that is not needed. And that's using the built-in function. I'm not trying to rip the whole operating system by hand. But, you know, especially with, say, the GUI version of Windows, you end up with every feature almost is already installed and just sitting there. And only it makes it pretty quick to turn things on because all it's going to do is basically create some junctions and point to the locations that are hidden within that thing. And so by reducing the image size, I'm ripping all that stuff out so that my end result is a much smaller file. And the reason I'm having the source one here is I want to have some place I can actually add those features back in. So the source has got everything in it. And so when it runs Windows updates, well, the features that aren't turned on aren't all being updated. For some reason, this allows me to, I can still use it as the source when I want to add a feature. So, and the other thing I do here is I'm going to schedule a task to up and run this. Now, when I invoke the Windows Update command, I end up, one of the things I'm going to do is download the, I think it's PS Windows Update from the gallery. Well, unfortunately, if your package, if the NuGet provider needs to be updated, it hangs the scheduled task right there because I have not found a way to say I want to save is it save module, or it's not the install module. It's, yeah, I think the save module function has no way of telling it to go ahead and hit OK for the package provider. So my scheduled task has two steps. The first one to run to bootstrap the newest version of NuGet, and then the second one is going to start me a transcript, and then basically is doing the exact same thing before. It is going to invoke those two Windows updates. And I've got this particularly scheduled a Wednesday night at 11 o'clock. So, you know, Patch Tuesday comes around, it's going to run. I can't set it monthly. There's no way to say I want it to run on the Wednesday following the first or second Tuesday. It's just, there's no way to do that. So I just set it to run every Wednesday. And Microsoft releases security patches on Patch Tuesday, but they release a bunch of feature patches later. So the weekend, usually on Thursday. So I just want to get that scheduled so it's pretty much up to date all the time. Now the reason I went so late on a Wednesday is Microsoft frequently finds problems and pulls the thing. I'd rather wait for that before I dump it in there. Now, unfortunately, sometimes their updates break the image where I cannot add features afterwards. And January they did that. Really me getting ready for this, a pain in the neck. So I always, once I have these done, I always try to make a second copy of everything, so that if the next time it runs, it breaks the feature functionality, I still have a previous build. Yes, this would be on the host in which I've run this. I did not build this to be able to run against a remote computer. The coding, that's a lot more complicated when you do that. So the hope was to be able to run it in a remote session. I'm going to investigate how to make this work on Nano at some point, because Nano uses a totally different update functionality. Windows 10 has it too, but there's now some new functions that actually allow you to trigger built-in Windows Update that works remotely. Because if you've ever tried to do Windows Update from PowerShell, you can't run it in a remote session. The main functions out there, that other modules that other people work, they actually have to schedule a task to run immediately on the remote machine in order to get it to run, because there was just been something broken in Windows. Yeah, that does work, but still, you have to. Well, since they needed it to work in Nano, Windows 10 has benefited because now it works the same way, because those functions are actually there. Okay. Okay, let me take a look at what these actually will output. Because I know me talking about code. It'd be nice if we could actually run the demos and watch the thing run, but you know, it takes a long time to do Windows Update. Yeah, it boots up the VM, attaches it to the specified switch. The task runs, shuts down.
Basically like an added switch, so that way it has to
Well, it depends. You can specify an IP address if you're using one of the newer matted switches. You'll have to, because there's no DHCP, or you can use DHCP if you're using a bridged into a network that has it. And I most of the time use a bridge. I'm going to be playing with the whole natted one here in 2 weeks. Okay. I'm looking forward to it. I don't have.
It's really good to build containers for the exact reason they don't want to.
That would be interesting to play with. So in here, very similar to the other one, just adding these items in. Start the convert, showing off the parameters. It calls the initialize to build the partitions. Set VHD partition actually populates it. And here's where it's going to add all of those additional paths that it might go searching for. So it mounts all of these different source images. And then when it goes to add them, let's see, right here. So I've got the sources SSX, and then I've mounted into a temporary folder each of the WIM SSX that were in that WIM, so that it can add the NetFX to RE5. That was the only one it found. Now it does this before booting the VM, so I'm doing it to the VHD. I try to do a number of things on the outside because I can get more feedback. Right now, once I've kicked off the VHD, it has its own logging and creates some log files internally, but I'm not going to see any of that on the console if I'm trying to monitor it. Okay, so it's going to inject a boot script, has the unattend. Oh, one of the things, the unattend, I know a lot of, if you've ever worked with the unattend XML, a lot of sites have you create the thing and then you determine, is it 32-bit or 64-bit, and then find and replace all these settings throughout the day. I discovered that you can have the 32 and 64-bit side by side at the same time, except for when you're actually telling it to run a command, because then it'll run both the 32 and 64-bit on the 64-bit. But everything else, it only looks at its particular architecture for those. And I can show you an example of that later here. Copying the unattend. And then we're going to do the core one. That's basically the same process. It's just adding it. Now when we hit down here, we're actually going to update the WMF. Now this one gets a little weird. It's going to go and download. It goes onto Microsoft's site, accepts the licensing thing, and then downloads the WMF installers. Now it goes through and does this file exist? Does this file exist through the whole list? It also goes and it downloads the .NET 4.6. And then from here it is. We're creating a VM and running. And this is the part where it installed .NET 4.6. So my script at that point is .NET's one of those few things you can install from PowerShell. WMF is not. So you cannot use a PowerShell script to update WMF, unfortunately. So this one's going to go in to check, do you have at least .NET 4.6? If not, runs the installer, reboots, checks again. If it exists, then it'll either say I failed or I succeeded, save a text file specifying that, shut down, which I then use the mount VM runs block to check for the file. And once I've done that, then I'm going to directly apply each of the MSUs that were downloaded onto the image, and DISM will go through each one of these. If it doesn't apply, it'll continue on, even though it says successfully added package. Well, this was not a Windows 8.1. It did not add that package. It added this one. But it gives you the exact same result. It doesn't actually do anything. It's just like, I ran the program, it didn't throw an error, so it must have been successful. Then it creates, injects another script and starts it up again, and this time it's checking, do I have the appropriate version I said I wanted, the WMF? And if it does, it's going to set a flag saying, hey, this operating system has changed, it's ready to be packaged. Now in this case, I'm not packaging it off of this one because I want to run the Windows update. So it's going to do the exact same thing again on the other image. Okay, then we're going to get to the Windows update. Starting with the core one, now it's going to download the PS Windows update. I didn't want to have to build my own, so I figured it'd be easier just to use, because I'm kind of targeting Windows 10 with a bunch of this functionality. You can run ps-get on down level, and I have made this whole thing work on Windows 8 and Server 2012 fairly easily, but there's a lot more to it. And unfortunately, while I was going through this, I mean, has anyone here installed Windows 10, the RTM, and then updated to the 15.11, and then had a bunch of PowerShell stuff break? Yeah. I had a little harder time because I had installed on Windows 8.1, and I had set up the PowerShell package manager with the version that they allow to run down level, and they changed how they structured files and things they downloaded, and then I updated to Windows 10, then I updated to 15.11, and all sorts of things were broke. The task scheduler kept breaking. It turns out that there was a mop file in the System32 directory that hadn't been recompiled due to its location changing or something, and that drove me nuts before I finally found a solution. Because few solutions I found out there were like step through all of the System32 and compile every mop with this command. Well, that actually broke the OS. I had to do it. I tracked down the exact one, added it to the notes on the user voice entry about this particular bug to work around. So we download that package manager. I'm going to copy it into here, and in this case, I'm creating a differencing disk, because I don't want to take the time to run this, add anything out, or make changes if I don't need to. So the differencing disk is just a dash update off of my base copy. And no, to detect the differences, when Windows updates, the script for Windows Update runs, if there are updates to run, it creates a text file. that I then go back and check after it's shut down. Does this text file exist? If it exists, delete it and package it separate. And when I package it, I'm actually running sysprep on that. So
this is how you're doing all the offline files.
I'm using the PowerShell BISM module that comes with Windows. It's a wrapper around BISM, but I use all the PowerShell commands because I don't really like using BISM any more than I have to. And those command line utilities, you have to go hunting for. How do they do that? It's no help file. Google becomes your help file. So yeah, it runs the VM, and it detects if changes were detected, then it's going to merge that differencing disk back into the original, and it's going to sysprep it. So I create a new diff disk because I don't want to sysprep my original. I want to keep that so I can just boot it up and run the updates over and over and over again without changing the whole OS. So I sysprep it, and that script's going to delete a few things and runs a sysprep. But then afterwards, I'm going to remove or clean up the side-by-side folder. Now, I've done this before from inside the OS and outside. I wanted to watch what it was doing, so I did it after it shut down. So it uses a DISM command where basically I step through every single item that is not installed, that is just available. I mean, are you guys familiar with the Get Windows feature? Yeah, that one's a lot nicer. If you get Windows optional feature, will work on client OS too. It's not as friendly, but it's still the same data. But anything that is not installed or active, I'm going to go through and tell it to remove it and remove the source. And so it steps through every single one, long list. And that is going to trim a couple of gigs off my image. That is done. Okay, it's going to create a WIM. Now I always take the VHD and I convert it to a WIM first before I create, if I want an output of a VHD. So when I run the invoke Windows image update, I can specify what I want for an output. I can say no output at all, just update the image, keep it going. I'll extract it when I want. Or to create a WIM, or create a WIM and a VHD. Now the reason I would do that is I get a lot more compact VHDs when I go through the WIM and recreate the drive. It only adds about 3 minutes to the process on the system I'm using here. But I end up with a significantly smaller file. I mean, you can try all sorts of things to try to compact it. You know, remove the virtual memory file. You try to use the VHD compact functions, all these other stuff. They just don't quite get there. Because I want to try to make the smallest image. Because if I'm copying this image file out to a branch and I only got a T1, I don't want to have it so that actually for that production the next day because it's still going. So, alright, now we're going to go through the same basic process again for the core one. And that one's a lot less interesting other than the fact that I specified I only wanted, or that this one creates, this is the source. So the source one doesn't remove everything, but it only creates the WIM output. Because that's all I need for the source file. I don't need a VHD. I'm not going to be booting anything off it. I just, and here's the output from the schedule command at the end of the file. Now the schedule command pretty much runs the same thing. This is the output from the schedule. The difference, find it. Okay, this one had change detected on that drive. No changes, so it doesn't do any output. It just up and discards the file. So we get rid of that differencing disk, and it has nothing else to change. Let's take a look at the unattended. is quite a fun one to work with. In this case, I'm going to create my credential objects, so I don't have to type them. Enable the administrator. I'm going to pass it to additional administrator accounts I want it to create. And I'm doing the first boot script path of here. This is the file I want you to run the first time you start up. Take a look at that. Lovely, isn't it? You'll see here that for the part that actually I ended up to enable the administrator, I just during the specialized pass, all I'm doing is the net user and turning it on. Because with a server OS, that's going to automatically be enabled, but the client OS is always off. And that's the only way to really turn it on. The other way that most people recommend is to do the auto login. Well, I don't want to do the auto login because I don't like plain text password. Now, if you know anything about unattended XML, this is what the password looks like when it's encoded. It's not encrypted, it's encoded. So it's actually pretty easy to reverse, but not for anyone who might stumble across the file you forgot to delete. So if you know, I've got most of these sections all have both the 32 and 64, except for the ones that actually run the command. They do everything off the 32 and it works. One file, and I don't have to care what architecture I'm dealing with. Now, there's a couple of other things I've got. The unattend has quite a list of parameters. The login count, if I want to actually auto log in, that is available. I can set the computer name. I can set a first login or a first boot. Now, a first boot script, that means if I'm doing an auto login, that runs as an administrator. The first boot script, that runs as system during the specialized path. A first login script will only run the first time an administrator logs in, and then it will run as a fully elevated process. There's also another type of script, like the every login script, or every login process, or task, or whatever. That runs when any user logs in, and it becomes a permanent part of the default profile. So every user gets to run that at least once. So I set the product key, I can set the time zone. Now, I don't like looking up time zones, so I pre-populated this. The only thing I pre-populated, the locales are all in here too. I have not had to work with this in a while. It's been a while since I've had to deal with, the Spanish version of Windows. It was a lot harder dealing with it back in 2000. So I set the registered owner. Now these ones here, the first boot, first login, and every login, those are actually, they take a hash table. The hash table is going to be path of the command, a description of it, and the order in which you're running. So that I could run any number of additional functions if I needed to pre-install some other item that I have added into my image for when I'm actually going beyond the Windows update. So that's an additional program to try to help. You can put in any other additional scripts you want to run and files that you may have populated the whole enable administrator. Set the administrator password. I don't enable it, but the thing's going to throw a warning if you have not actually added additional users. Because otherwise you'll end up with a completely useless OS. Now here, I've taken those two images because I went through the whole, trace logon, and I actually copied the WIM onto the C drive. Not something, you don't need the source one inside. Normally you would have it on a network share or another way in which you can get it added, or you'll use it on the install Windows optional feature. Has a thing for targeting an actual VHD and add it from the outside. going to disconnect this sucker. No, I'm kind of partial to the blue. World. Where I did not check the hotfix level, so hoping it shows that it's got up there. Grab the wrong image. Non-production VMs tend to be highly slow. So this machine's got all of the patches as of yesterday installed. Quite a long list. A couple of them with an older date. Those are the ones that are part of the, the 2012 R2 update, since Microsoft's so great at naming. So, no network connection. All right, so the install state is removed on these items. Okay. Format of this. Okay, one of the common things I run into, especially at work, is vendors don't like a non-GUI operating system. Much as I prefer small, easy, fast, less things to patch, half the time their software won't run without the management infrastructure. They can't even launch their tools to manage their software. If I can get this, I'd rather use this than the full desktop, because the last thing I need is the vendor getting on the machine when they're trying to fix something and pulling up the web browser and going off. This is not the fastest process in the world. We're going to minimize this while it's running. So it's going to show. I'm running the IFC steroids add-on. Very useful for a number of things, but occasionally when you have multiple tabs, they all end up with weird text colors. That's what that one does. I do the like. Fairly simple. I have a few things that you can actually do when you create a VM with this helper file. There was how many processors you want, how much memory you can start up. If I run this on my laptop, I could not give it too good. It's not. If you've ever worked with the install Windows feature, it tends to hang a bit. If you don't have internet connectivity, it'll hang at 24%, 68%. As it attempts to go out to Windows Update. Even if you give it a source, it still tries to go out to Windows Update. Or and after it installs the file. I think that's on the install Windows optional feature one has an option. And frankly, from running Wireshark, it still goes out to the internet and tries to access Windows Update, even if it doesn't use it. Which it might work, because even though I'm running this as myself, it will run as the system account. Proxy's not letting it run. System accounts don't have internet access. For sure. Alright, I wanted to show you the Git partition style. What it does, it's just going to return either GPT or MBR, and that will fairly easily be used to detect generation 1 or generation 2. You're not creating a VM. And so this is what I did to create that demo file. I'm going to run the unattend XML. I pre-populated a simple secure password. And then of course I copy in the WIM file, which, yeah, you don't do that in production. Kind of defeats the whole purpose of making a small image. Fully patched small image. This is where I found that the invoke and run wait and the mount, they were just too useful not to let out. I actually got most of the code from those from, I remember his name, but he created a script called the image factory. It does basically the same thing. It takes all of your ISOs and creates fully updated images, but it doesn't do any tasking other than trying to do some stuff from the outside. So I got a lot of my designs from his stuff, in addition to what Microsoft had for creating it. But I wanted something I could do a bit more with. One of the things that, when it does go to do the Windows update, it automatically looks, the script I put on there automatically looks for a pre-update script and a post-update script that it will kick off if they exist, so that if you have something else you want to add in to, say, update a different application, then it would be possible to do so. Really likes that 68%. Yeah, that. Yeah, some of those are from that. I tend to, when I'm actually working myself rather than with the demo, I tend to, yeah, I'm using my own stuff. So yeah, I got the volume ones, but in order to make it so that this module could be used by other people, I wanted to make it as easy as possible. So if you use the download, yeah, you use the download one, you use the basic one, it'll skip the Windows 7 because you don't have a dollar for that, but at least you can see it at work. So you have the opportunity to do something, see kind of how I did those items. And the advanced one, this is the one I actually run on our server at work, is something similar to this, so that we always have a 2012 R2. The source one is what I use the most. Most of our stuff in VMware. VMware has this unfortunate problem of there's no way to take an ISO and create a VHDK from it easily. So there's not an easy way to build the initial image and install the VMware tools and then start it up. But once the image is created, if you have PowerCLI, you can actually copy in a script, tell it to kick off, convert the thing back to a template, back and forth. Now, with VMware, they do their own sysprep. When you deploy a template, they handle that part. You don't have to worry about that. But, we have a number of Hyper-V machines, especially out of our more remote locations. And so I want to keep these as small as possible. But the source one has become invaluable if we forget to install like the .NET 3.5. You're not going to get it any other way. With Windows Desktop, you can just point it at another one that's with the same patch level, and it'll pull it. Haven't been able to get that to work in 2012. So you use the source file. Most of the machines I manage are all done with Core. So if I have the feature I need to add in, put those management tool interface for some of our applications that have to be on every machine. So I don't get as much of a core experience as I would like. Oh yeah. He's on the internet. He's so bad. No, I've got the DCs are core. I'm going to get to remove the management tools because we finally got the software that needed it off of them. And I'm also looking forward to when Snover ever manages to get all the rest of the features added into Nano, because AD is probably one of the most asked for item. We don't want people doing stuff on the domain controllers. So you want those as small as possible. They've got GUI remote tools you can load on your desktop. There's no need to connect to a machine anymore. It's not like they're taking away the GUI from those that don't want to learn PowerShell. They're putting it elsewhere. This module actually has the convert functionality can be run on down level machines. You don't have to have Hyper-V to be able to convert images, and part of that was this lovely class that I got from Microsoft that allows you to not have to have the Hyper-V and VHD tools in order to actually convert a file. So the convert WIM to VHD does not require you to have Hyper-V. All the rest of the functions do, so the module will check, do you have Hyper-V? If this is on Windows 10, you have that extra feature under Hyper-V also installed, because they're not going to work if you don't have something to actually mount the VM onto. As much as I would love to be able to do it completely offline, there's so far no way to take a look at an offline VHD and say, what patches do you need? Let's go get them and install. It's not there. You have to have the OS live and use the Windows Update functionality. In the new unattend, it's going to take forever to scroll past all those. So much code in here. All right. I started with the boilerplate XML object, and I literally didn't put any more than I absolutely had to into it. So when I'm actually working with each of these, yeah, so when you send it a boot script, it's actually going to add it to the execute command array, because that's where they all go. But the adding these, I'm doing some lovely XML pen child elements, and you got to have that namespace stuff to the holding breaks. Here, let's look at that hash tables requirement. So for this first boot execute command, if I wanted to put my own in there, it's got a couple of basic keys. It's got a path key, description, and an order. So I don't really know if description is a required thing, but I made it required for this to work. And the weird thing is the boot one uses one called a path, the login ones, and these are the actual XML tags. So they use command line instead. They both look the same. Now, the one feature I didn't put in there that could be is the first boot execute command. You can access the network if your network card actually, the driver is compatible with it. You have the username and password to access. I think that's why they call it path instead of command line. But you know, they just execute through the console like anything else. Seriously? I think the 68% is going to eat up the rest of the time. Does anyone have any other questions? Yes. Let's actually go back to there. So, the Windows Image Tools module and all the functions that are already published on the PowerShell gallery. The slide deck, I use Sway because I'm not a big fan of PowerPoint. And the demo scripts, I've got a gist of everything else that's not part of that I've been working with. And like I typoed there, it should be .wordpress. So yeah, so Windows Image Tools off of the gallery if you want to get it. I have through the gallery page. There's also a link there to my GitHub where I've got all the code. God, this machine fell asleep. What was that? Well, for one thing was deciding, I want to do this. I didn't have enough hard drive space. I already deleted the VHD or something, and I want to do. I've got some time in the evening. I want to do a test. I spend the next 4 hours waiting for Windows to update itself. Same thing at work. The biggest pain point there was the ability to have a fully patched source that would allow me to add any feature that I didn't add at the time I initially laid down the OS. Now, I haven't fully got it fleshed out, but I'm going to get it so that the convert WIM to VHD function, I need to, right now it'll grab all of the sources inside the source file, the ISO or the WIM we're pulling from, but I don't have the ability, I need to have it so it adds an additional one so that we can specify a source WIM that we've already pre-patched so I can actually utilize this for a full production mode. So I need to have that so I can create something that I can then use in a lab. So it will basically take my WIM and build up and pre-populate a number of the features there and not use up all my hard drive space process. Because the hard drives are cheap. Coming out of my pocket, there's not much room for everybody to do that. The patches will go to wherever it's configured. So if you have a pre-patch script that sets the registry key to use a WSUS server, it will use that server. It does tend to grab everything. I'm thinking I need to add some stuff to specify. It doesn't do language packs, so you don't end up with that. You know, I'm mainly, to me, it's more an initial lab environment or before I run it into production. Yeah, save me some time. I mean, it's primarily a time saver, although it's been 6 months building it, so I don't know how much of a time saver it is. Well, I'm trying to share it with others so I can save other people time. But it was definitely a fun project just to learn some of the issues. And half the time I was like, everything should work, doesn't work. Well, you know, Microsoft occasionally does have those bad patches, and they'll release a replacement to it usually on the next month's cycle, and then everything works again. So for that reason, I usually keep previous source available to use in case that happens. Going back in and looking at all the hot fixes, if I get hot fixes, and installing each one at a time until everything works is time consuming. Like, I wish Microsoft would test the ability to add features into the patched version of Core before they ship the patch. No, it's just a standard Windows update process, however it runs. I'm using another module off the gallery, the PS Windows update, to do the job. I mean, I could write something to do it, but with that, I was able to filter things out a little more effectively and try to write on my own. I mean, I wrote before Windows 10 came out last year, I had put together a process to do this, and it was just a basic script. Blogged about it, put it up there, completely broken on Windows 10. Doesn't work at all. But it was where I initially learned a lot of the steps that were required, but that one used my own Windows update code, and the problem I had with that is every time I ran it on Windows 7, I suddenly had Skype installed. So I had to do some extra filtering. Things going to finish the time. When this is done, it's just going to give me the yellow text saying, hey, you know, this needs to be rebooted before it finishes. If it throws a bunch of red on a screen, that means something closed. And it worked earlier today, so I'm pretty sure it's just, in this situation, it has no internet access, the items are removed, but the source is going to work. So, in my production environment, this sits on a network share. BSC is pointed at it when it wants to add anything. It pulls from there, and the BSC handles it. Any other questions? But 58% is just so interesting. What? Oh, we're the 92. Okay, we're almost done then. This one doesn't last as long as the other two. Because I know when the built-in tools for adding Windows features always wants to check Windows Update after it's done. It's a good thing. We want to keep our business fast. I'm sorry, what was that?
Which function did you notice today when I used basically just deploy? You know, like the,
okay, I actually have something on that. that was the basic convert example. This one steps through and just does an automatic conversion on everything. So this one's got the basic. This one's going to do an auto login with the administrator, and it's going to copy a bunch of files that exist on this machine, and I'm doing a loop through an array of hash tables here. So it's the convert to WIM, and then I'm going to, the values I set, the VHD parameters, that's this set, where's the ISO, what layout, what index I'm going to use in the size, and where to put it. And then the common parameters, which, way back up here, dynamic, reverse hook, and the unattend file. So it goes through and creates one unattend and injects that into each file. So you do the same thing with straight one-liner here. Path, source path, disk layout, dynamic. If you want the unattend, you would just specify that, the unattend parameter, and pass it path. Yeah, you just need to pass it to path. So in this case, the new unattend XML, it outputs the directory object as a file created. Sufficient for this to create it. So with the convert WIM to VHD, that's what I would do for just deploying the end result. I'm doing the WIM. You know, if I've exported a VHD, then I would use the mount VHD and run script, and I would use that to inject files and whatnot.
PSUG working or whatever else I want to text out. So before all my servers, what I've been doing for now, I have a little script that creates all the VMs and then mounts the ISO, then I have to fire them off.
Oh yeah, well, Microsoft built a tool that does a lot of that, and they have a whole bunch of stuff in there because it debugs things, so it can send out its initial build to the console. But I borrowed a bunch of their stuff since they put it on GitHub under them. I feel like completely available. I kind of expanded on it, fixed a few bugs they had, and one of the things, if you inside a module scope, if you mount a drive and have a drive letter attached to it, that does not become visible to the script when you've done it within a function inside a module, unless that function runs get PS drive. Oh yeah, it comes out, but you have to run a get PS. If I'm doing it inside a script, I mount a drive and it has an attached letter to it, then I get the drive letter immediately. Inside a module, though, my function has to run the get PS drive in order to refresh that, and then it becomes visible. I don't know exactly what it is. It's a bug that's been on Connect for years. The solution is just to run that. Oh. Finish. There we go. Exactly.
Just side note.
You probably like your kind of
But I'll do it. Find the kind of roads in there.
Oh, there's, yeah.
And that, like,
Oh yeah, MGT is a great tool for doing a bunch of this, but it deals too much with VB script, and I really don't want to run that. I can follow it, but I don't want to do it. Yeah. So this one's simple reboot, and I've got the tools installed. Oh yeah.
I mean, I knew it was probably possible, but I didn't think it was.
Well, creating the partitions, I had to learn a bit about that. I can't remember who wrote it. I know I've got it on the GitHub readme for this, but he created a thing for just doing, just taking, laying out a version 2 VHD. And that's what kind of got me started on how to do the process. But yeah, you have to have a certain set. Microsoft actually has a nice thing on it because you have to have the GUID partitions table. You have to have certain GUID numbers assigned to each partition to tell what it is. In this case, most of the tools they give away with just saying, okay, I'm making a Microsoft reserved partition. Well, in the underlying code, you got to have the right GUID to tell it. And Microsoft requires you have to have a UEFI partition where the actual system boot code goes, and then a reserved partition of a certain size, and nothing goes on. It just remains raw. My understanding is there are certain times in which they create some temporary files and they'll write something out on that. That's just raw data into it. And of course your OS. Now, they also, if you're laying it, because the instructions I had from Microsoft included everything. If you were just like, building an image and put on a laptop, there's also recovery tools, which is extracted from a certain WIM file that's on an ISO, and then that's the PE environment, and then they want you to take a copy of your install WIM and also put it on another partition, so recovery partition. And in this case, if those partitions are created, because the convert function is just a wraparound the other two, so the one that initializes the partition, that's all it does. I'm not passing any data from it to the other one, so it has to look into the existing WIM file and say, oh, I've got recovery partition. Let's find those other files and populate them too. And it also looks at, okay, am I looking at what format is this machine? Nice. That design. Lean against the the keyboard. Stop recording. I don't know. It was definitely an interesting journey, and I'm hoping that other people can find this interesting because. Well, I was working my way backwards from doing a test lab. I needed to have something useful to work with WMF5 or just WMF4 preloaded and have everything in it so that I could work with it. I wanted to have it all patched because, if you started off with, DSC was actually broke in the RTM for Windows 2012 R2. You had to have the project. And that, of course, made it so you couldn't use the ISO to add anything else, and that's a mess. That kind of led me onto this whole path of running into that problem. But I wanted to have something that's fully patched because Microsoft frequently releases updates that that improve DSC. So I wanted to have a starting point. The next step here is to have the ability to create a lab. Something that's automated. Now,
now that I've used V5, I will not code, especially DSC under the V5.
Oh yeah. I've written a few modules myself. There was no INI editor, and I had to make an INI change. And that's when I discovered that the big problem with DSC, sometimes you have to make a change, but that change needs to make another thing. Like if you're changing a config file, you need to restart the service. That's not building a DSC. You've got to create your own function that wraps around those other capabilities. There's no way in there to say, oh, if this set run this extra thing, restart this one, but then follow it up with another command that makes sure it's running. Common enough issue. But yeah, I've written a few of the old ones. Steve Murawski made some really great tools. It was one of those situations where he did the presentation and then he stopped working on it. And so I actually had to watch the presentation screen by screen, copy everything I saw from there, and then read the code and reverse engineer it just to be able to make a working copy. So I eventually wrote a blog so other people could use it. But I think that whole DSC resource needs to be upgraded to version 5. And a few things, I think it was initially very much towards his environment. So while I can get it to work, and it does some great things, it needs some updates. I mean, V5, especially on the poll server side, they've made some significant changes that they demoed at the European conference that, well, you can have a machine boot up and say, go to that server, but don't tell it what config it needs. And then from the server, you can actually change the field in the database to tell it what config. Anyway, so I guess that is